Hello, and welcome to this episode of Someone You Know, a podcast about disabilities, those who have them, and those who love them. I'm your host, Andrew Abraham, and today we'll be discussing disability in Latino communities, along with how culturally competent care can help Spanish speakers get connected with resources designed to help them and address their specific needs. With me today is a very special guest, Ms. Rocio Perez from the ARC of Illinois, based in Tinley Park. She has worked with the ARC for 6 years and has used her skills to advocate on behalf of individuals and families with disabilities via programs hosted by the ARC, helping connect people with local and federal resources. Thank you very much for joining me today, Rocio. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Now, if you or someone you know struggles with a disability or has had experiences with the disability community, then this podcast is for you. And even if you personally don't have or don't know anyone with a disability, chances are someone you know loves someone with a disability. And by listening here today, you can learn a little bit more about how the disability experience can vary based on culture, race, and other social factors. Let's get started. Now, first, I want to take a moment to explain why this episode exists and who it's meant for. I am currently an undergraduate student at the University of Illinois, Chicago, also known as UIC, and for this past semester, I've been taking a course called Disability in Latino Communities, where I learned about the many differences in the disability experience when it comes to Latino immigrant families. And for our final project, students are tasked with creating a resource that can be used by the Latino community to help them and their family members with disabilities. To fulfill this requirement, I'll be talking about the ARC of Illinois and highlighting the Spanish language advocacy work they engage in as a way of spreading awareness among those in the Latino community who would benefit from the information that the ARC has to share. Now, if you've never heard of the ARC of the US, it is the largest national community-based organization advocating for and serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities such as autism, ensuring they can live integrated lives in their communities and have access to resources. With over 650 chapters nationwide, the ARC is on the front lines to ensure that people with IDD and their families have the support and services they need to be fully engaged in their communities. The ARC of Illinois is one of the many chapters that work to support those with intellectual and developmental disabilities along with their families. Mainly working online from home offices across the state, the ARC of Illinois lives up to its name as a statewide organization dedicated to providing crucial assistance to families from all corners and walks of life. The guest I have with me today, Ms. Rocio Perez, works with the ARC of Illinois, focusing on helping Latino families navigate the landscape of disability support services. I first met her when she gave a lecture to my class about her work with the ARC, which led us to talking about how we could best spread awareness to Latino community about the work the ARC does for Spanish speakers. Rocio and the ARC of Illinois are one of many organizations that have recognized the gap in services when it comes to Latino families and are working to fill in the blanks by hosting online informational meetings and workshops meant for Spanish speakers. Rocio, again, welcome and thank you for taking the time to meet with me and discuss your work with the ARC.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here today.
Now, before we hit the ground running and get into the nitty-gritty, tell us a little bit about yourself, Rocio. What made you interested in helping those with disabilities, their families, and what is it that led you to the ARC of Illinois?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I have both a professional as well as a personal reason for helping those with disabilities. Personally, I am a parent of a young man on the autism spectrum. And so it is always, as a parent, I'm always looking for resources and I always want to be helping others as well because as a mutual support, we help each other better. I'm a social worker by background, so naturally, I like to link up people with services in their community. My studies in social work are kind of like in the Jane Addams community model system, and so those two blend. Also, personally, my father and my mother both inspired me with their modeling of helping people in their community. And the Arc of Illinois inspired me that in the way that I can do more of that work. And it also gave me an opportunity to increase my skills. It offered the opportunity to learn to do work virtually using the webinar platform and other opportunities, and also just the opportunity for professional growth and working from home. As you parents know, being able to work from home is wonderful. It allows for flexibility, and especially as my son is out of the school system. And so he does not have a 6 to 8 hour day like when he was in school. So the ARC offered that, and I've been very happy. I've also have supportive supervisors who have guided me and mentored me.
Well, that was a beautiful introduction, Rocio. Very well put. And again, the more that I get into disability support services, especially in my role as a paraprofessional, the more I start to notice that a lot of people get into this work for personal reasons. Like they have a family member or a friend or somebody that they really respect or admired that kind of changed the way that they viewed disability or how we as people can help those with functional differences. It is inspiring to see how people, see the world around them and want to advocate for change based on those that they love. So you talked a little bit about, the Arc of Illinois. Can you tell us a little bit about the Arc in general as an overarching organization? Like, what are their goals? How long have they been doing what they've been doing?
Sure. So the ARC of the US, which is the national organization, as well as other ARCs in all 50 states, really started in the 1930s by groups of parents who were looking for programs for their children. And this was way before we had laws like IDEA or ADA. And so that was the thought behind it, is supporting families who have a loved one with IDD, intellectual and or developmental disabilities. In the 1950s, all the states started formalizing or incorporating as non-for-profits. Here in Illinois, we incorporated in 1955, and this year we're going to be celebrating our 75th year of service to the community. And our focus has been inclusion, advocacy, learning. We want individuals to lead the best life possible.
All right, thank you for that explanation. Now, one last question before we dive into everything. This episode will be discussing disability in Latino communities and Spanish language outreach. In your words, doing the work that you've been doing with the ARC, why do you think it's important to specifically target Latino communities and Latino families when giving information about community resources for those with disabilities?
First of all, it's been an underserved community, and so it's a matter of providing access to information, access to programs, also um, correcting or updating misinformation in the community that they might hear from the next door neighbor or they might hear from another parent. So, providing accurate information as well as steps. This is the first step that you need to do. So, like a task like signing up for the puns list, which is the way to obtain funding in the state of Illinois. It's not just providing that information in Spanish, but we're also guiding them and letting them know, hey, the first time you do it, you need to collect your documents, have everything ready. You need to do it in person. This is the way you call the agency and you let them know. So we want to make sure that they're successful in obtaining that information. So we take pride in making sure that it's well-rounded information in Spanish, but we're also aware that some Latinos may not be as fluent in Spanish. And so, we have that information in English as well.
I think that was a perfect segue into what we'll be talking about next. So, as part of my disability and Latino communities class, we've done a lot of reading about research that explores this intersection of Latin American culture and disability. all of which emphasize the importance of outreach specific to Latinos and to their cultural values as being the most effective in the long run. These articles mention many common barriers that Latinos have and continue to face in getting access to services. Like you mentioned, it has been an underserved community, and their needs have not always been taken into account when this sort of information is being spread. Now, there's three major barriers that I'd like to discuss today and talk about how your work with the ARC minimizes the impact that they have on Latinos with disabilities. The first one is the communication barrier, which mainly refers to the general lack of translated materials and interpreters or interpretive services to meet the needs of Spanish speakers in a English-dominant society. Without proper Spanish language outreach, many times Latino communities don't become aware of the programs and services meant to help them in their particular situations. The next barrier is the cultural barrier, which refers to making information and facts about disability relevant and applicable to Latinos and their families, which can be done by practicing cultural competency. And that's different from just making stuff available in the Spanish language. As you mentioned, some Latinos aren't the most fluent, myself included, with Spanish. So having that information available in a variety of methods, of mediums, in languages, and just having information at also different levels of understanding. The third barrier is the stigma barrier, which consists of the biases and stereotypes that society holds about people with disabilities, as well as the various cultural associations that accompany the disabled label. While disability may be something that is experienced by all people, the way that we talk about and choose to treat disability varies from place to place, culture to culture. So, by addressing these barriers, we are hoping to more effectively support Latinos and their families with disabilities by better connecting with their thoughts and fears surrounding the process of getting a family member or a loved one help or assistance with their needs. So, first, talking about the communication barrier when it comes to Spanish speakers and getting them the information that they will benefit from. Just first and foremost, what sort of programs does the ARC offer for Spanish speakers and their families who want to learn a little bit more about disability as it relates to their family?
Okay, thank you. Well, first, I want to start off in that the ARC has bilingual, bicultural staff who are aware of the need for language access as well as accessibility access. So, that being number one is the staff. Number two is that we offer programming, our webinars. We have that are completely in Spanish, but then we also have our webinars in English that have simultaneous electronic captioning in Spanish. And we have shared with people how to use that link so that they can also be a part of the English webinars because it's sometimes difficult to get professionals on certain topics who can speak in both languages. Number three, we work with a very talented translator. And I say that that's so important because it is a skill and you want to work with a translator that is knowledgeable about the different terms that are used by Spanish speaking individuals who are from many countries. We are not talking about just Mexico. We're talking about families who live in South America, Central America. So we want to make sure that the information is going to be provided in a way that they are going to understand. Obviously, there are some words in English that are not going to translate, one of them being respite. So, when you have that, then you're going to, you'll have the English word next to what would be an explanation of that in Spanish. So at the ARC, we've really made an effort to have that in our materials, and especially in the Illinois Lifespan Program, the Family to Family Health Information Program, as well as the Family Advocate Program. And it is slowly going across all our other programs that we have here in the ARC. However, we collaborate, amongst our 7 programs. We're always working together. We take calls from families. If they call another program, we also have a language line. So If families are calling us in Polish or Arabic, then we could also rely upon our language line to assist us. Again, we're growing, evolving, and we're just trying to look for other ways to make it more accessible and address the needs of the Spanish speaking families as well as those families who's where English is a second language.
I thank you, Rocio. So as part of my coursework at UIC, I have also minored in linguistics and the study of language as it has evolved throughout time and how, words encode meaning. And I've actually done a little bit of research in the field of Spanish linguistics when it comes to talking about disability. And a lot of what you have mentioned rings very true. Some of the words that we come up for in English, have a lot of Western cultural values embedded in them and may not always translate one to one when it comes to just trying to find a word or a phrase that, translates it into Spanish. Like, it is a continuous process of seeing how these words encode meaning, seeing what they are trying to convey about a certain concept relating to disability, and then relying on your cultural awareness of Spanish speakers, Latino culture, to make sure that the words you are using are not only relevant, not only make sense, but are appropriate and are conveying the right information to Spanish speakers. I, again, grew up in a Latino family. My very Ecuadorian grandmother spoke some English, and a lot of the Spanish that I picked up from her. And after her passing, I learned that so many of the words that she used in other variations of Spanish would be considered very offensive. So I very much had to be aware of the words I would use in Spanish because I know they don't always have the same meaning to different Spanish speakers. So that's just an example of not only the linguistic diversity when it comes to talking about disability, but the linguistic diversity within the same language when it comes to different speakers in different places at different times. So, again, building off this idea of translation, finding the right words to convey the right meanings, what sort of thought goes into the process of translating your English language materials and taking English language research and translating it into Spanish materials that can be used by the people that the ARC helps?
Well, like I said, we work with a very talented translator. Internally, it's reviewed by myself or another staff person, Ruth Aguilar, who also she is a native language speaker from Mexico. So having us review it is also helpful. And then sometimes we also look to someone from the community to review it as well. So depending upon of how much time and how fast we want to get this information out, it does go through some level of review before it is actually shared, whether that's online or whether via email.
All right, thank you for that elaboration. The second barrier, the cultural barrier, gets a little bit more complicated. Yes, it does have some aspects of communication when it comes to language, but culture, the intangible yet very essential force that works to bring people together and form something bigger than the sum of its parts, defined by shared worldview and experience, is something that permeates every aspect of our lives. From my experience growing up in a Latino household, there are very few things in the world that are stronger than the bonds of Latino family, which is a very closely and dearly held cultural value present among almost all Latino cultures. And to that point, much research has been done on the importance of family support and involvement in the lives of disabled family members. A 2021 research study explored the impact that culturally adapting service had on parents accepting services and being involved, and how that resulted in better outcomes for their family members or loved one with a disability. Just a really quick quote: "There are theoretical reasons and some evidence that parents from diverse cultures will accept and benefit from adapted intervention supports. For example, evidence from research on intervention for children with ADHD and disruptive behavior suggests that parents from the Latinx community benefit from inclusion of specific cultural components into intervention programs to support increase in parent knowledge, acceptance of the service, and decrease in parental stress. It was basically saying that when we're looking at interventions or different ways of helping those with disabilities, if we keep this idea of culture in mind and culturally adapting certain aspects of, a process or an intervention, it can help to include parents in that process of supporting their child, which I know from firsthand experience leads to a lot less stress. When my parents were able to be involved and know what was actively going on with my disabled younger brother when he was going through the special ed program, it made them a lot more at ease because they knew, what their child would be experiencing on this day, what sort of methods or what sort of therapy he would be going through, and they could be present for as much or as little of that process as they wanted. So just giving people that agency to know what it is that's going on and how they can be involved, I found has been huge for so many people.
Right. Family is very important. And I think, when one of us is on a call, we want to be welcoming, we want to talk to the parent, but at times, sometimes we might need to involve a sibling just in case if there needs to be someone there in the background to kind of listen to the same information that we're providing and maybe do it in Spanish for the mom and English for the sibling. Sometimes the sibling has the email and the mom doesn't. So I think being aware of, speaking with the family, and if they need some assistance, also being aware that sometimes they might be afraid to call us because there's always some hesitancy, whether it's about the disability itself, saying, oh, someone just told me to call you. Or maybe there's some hesitancy because, as you know, there's mixed status families. And so, we can say, yes, your child is eligible. So I think we also help with allaying some misinformation, and having all of us on the staff are have been parents or siblings, and particularly the three of us who are currently bilingual bicultural. Two of us are parents, and one is an extended family member, and so they've been exposed to the situations that families go through. And again, it depends on the stage that they're at the time that they call us.
All right, thank you for that. Yeah, I feel like when it comes to siblings, especially, it's almost like there's a built-in advocate for that family member with a disability. I especially feel that way the older I get and the more I reflect on my experiences with my brother. I just kind of get the idea of, if not me, then who? If I'm not going to be the one to stand up for him, if I'm not going to be the one to educate myself to learn more about autism, disability, and these many very complex concepts of social science that kind of define and shape our views of disability, then how can I make this world a better place? Or how can I work to make sure that my brother is in a place where he can feel safe, in an environment where he is able to learn and grow and do all the things that most neurotypically developing people are able to do? So that has been something that has guided my life, especially the last few years.
I think that's really important that you want to be involved as a sibling, but I also think we also need to recognize that there are some siblings who may not want to be involved, and sometimes that's harder for the family to recognize, especially in the Latino culture where we want to keep each other together. It's very hard when someone wants to be somewhat apart. But I think explaining that that's okay, and that maybe in the future that sibling might come back, or maybe they might find their own way of how they can support the family member with the disability.
Right. And I feel like at any given time, not everyone will be ready to, accept the responsibility or accept the reality of certain situations. They may need some time, to figure their own things out, especially in families with a large need Sometimes a lot of that responsibility gets shifted onto older siblings or to different members of the family through no fault of anybody. It's just what has to happen in order for things to move and for things to, work in a family. But I find that, no matter how much time you need or how far you need to go, you'll always come back to how you grew up or how you were initially exposed to the world. And the more I reflect on my experiences, the more I realize that every aspect of my person and of who I am has been influenced by my upbringing with my brother having to explain what autism
Mhm.
was to kindergartners. Well, I was a kindergartner. And yeah, there is really no aspect of my life that hasn't in some way been shaped by having my younger brother be my younger brother. But it is a hard thing to have to care for those with such diverse needs and with such diverse um
Yeah, and that's
yeah,
why it's important.
functionality. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important that there is a program called Sib Shops that we can let people know that there are programs for the siblings. And then there's also, the Sib Shop network, which is available for those adults who are siblings so that they can get the support as well. So that's like working with the family, giving the information, working with the siblings, and then working with the individual with the disability. So taking care of the family.
Right. And a lot of those thoughts that I expressed came like as a direct result of my disability studies education from college, where I needed to pay tuition and pay my fees. But to have that information that you are able to face this and you are able to, use your capacity to help your family members is so important to have accessible to everybody, because this level of understanding of the disability experience shouldn't just be gatekept for those who are able to go to school or able to attend university. It should be available to people because it's something that has dramatically improved and helped me understand my own life. So having this information for all people, I think, is something that is amazing and will help so many, like myself and like yourself, with siblings or with children with disabilities. Before we get into some more questions, I want to quickly talk about cultural competence, which is the ability to interact with people from different cultural backgrounds in a way that appropriately integrates and considers their cultural identity. And that's kind of the essence of getting around the cultural barrier, is to understand different cultures, to put yourself in that person's shoes. They may be coming from a long way away. They may not have the best grasp on the language or, social life when coming to a new country. But just being able to have compassion, empathy, and understanding for people who are very different from yourself. And by creating interventions with cultural competency in mind, I think that we are able to better connect with and assist people from many different backgrounds by making this information relevant to them and their cultural upbringing and understanding of the world. So, getting back to some of our questions, how does the kind of work that you do with the ARC consider cultural factors when working with Latino families?
Well, again, like I spoke before, in terms of the language, both written as well as verbal. The other thing is our webinars in Spanish are usually done in the evening because we found that that best serves the time that they have available and better attendance. And we also at the ARC have a diverse staff. So we have men and women. We also have other cultural groups represented as well. So I think it's something that we take very seriously. And we want to be mindful. And then, sometimes the families are the ones who will send us an email, or when we see them in person, who will let us know, hey, I need some information on this, or what is happening. More recently, there's been a lot of concern with some of the changes that are growing um, due to the political environment. And in December of 2024, we developed a webinar to help families consider an emergency plan, just in the event if they felt that their family could be subject to separation of some point. And so I think just being aware and trying to be proactive. We also get involved with in collaborations with other community groups. So, each of the staff has their own network. And so that information impacts our work, and then that information is also filtered out. We have a Facebook page, and so we're also sharing information, and so that information is in English and Spanish, or maybe that information is talking about research studies, that are for the Asian American population, or maybe they're looking for the African American population. Again, that's something, the clinical research studies, that not a lot of families know about. And so being able to provide that information to a diverse group, because clinical researchers are looking for that. They're looking to reach out to different types of families, and understand the cultural differences of whether it's the disability, or whether it's the impact of early intervention, or what's going on as adolescents.
Right, I think what you mentioned about having just a wide variety of staff, men, women, people from different cultures, different kinds of Spanish speakers, having that diversity, if I can still say that, is important, because it just comes with getting new ideas and new ways of thinking about these concepts, which for people who work in this field a lot of times, sometimes it can be easy to get stuck in the rut of, this is the way we've done things, this is the way things have been, this is what works, so let's just stick with that, instead of trying to find new and innovative ways to reach out to people who need assistance, and to make people aware and comfortable with asking for help and getting that assistance that they need. So diversity, for as much as it's being maligned nowadays, is what makes organizations like the ARC strong and able to respond to the many different cultural needs of many different people, I think, at least.
Exactly. No, I think it's so true. We support one another. We learn from one another, and it only makes our work better.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I mentioned the family, how the Latino family plays a very major role in the culture. In, again, your work, what role does family play when it comes to helping Latinos who come to the ARC for assistance, either regarding a family member or someone close to them? Like, how do you try to involve the family when it comes to assistance?
Well, depending on who's calling us, I mean, the majority of the time, it's usually the parent. We may get a call here and there from a sibling. And then after that, it's professional, followed by the actual person with the disability. So, depending on who's calling us, we try to see, what their need is. Is there anybody else that needs to be involved in the conversation? Because depending if the person who has the disability is a minor or is over the age of 18, we have to, and to give the information, we have to know have to know, okay, who are we talking about? Which is the age group? What are the resources that they may be eligible for? So it is a conversation. Our calls are anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour long, depending on what they're looking for. And so it's engaging them, seeing what they're looking for. Where do they live in the state of Illinois? Because that also has something to do with the resources.
All right, yeah, thank you. And then just talking a little bit about research and, again, the part that parent involvement plays. There's been a lot of research showing that parents, caretakers, guardians are oftentimes the most effective primary interventionists, like the people who are first to come to the aid of a family member with disability, and can be the most effective because they spend the most time with their child or with their family member, and just having that rapport, having that knowledge of an individual, because every person with a disability, even if it's the same disability, will express that in different ways. So knowing someone's specific cues or their triggers for having certain like behavior, knowing that information from a first-hand primary perspective, like living with that, is a type of knowledge that, you can read about, you can research, you can study, but if you're not actually there on the ground helping someone with a disability with these things, you don't really understand fully. But again,
Well,
including
it is
oh, go
true
ahead.
because families, when you are in that same situation, and let's say I'm talking to a mom of a younger child, I can relate to that because I went through it to a certain extent. But every experience is their own unique experience. But I can certainly say, yes, this was a difficult time. Or I can say, talk to the social worker at the school, or, kind of relate some of my experience in a neutral manner, obviously, but then at the same time provide them with the information that they need.
Right, it's about, again, making that information relevant to them and to their
Mhm.
situation. It means the world to have that personalized sort of care and that like personal way of helping a family member or a loved one.
Mhm.
All right. And so the last barrier that I want to bring up is the stigma barrier. And we kind of touched on this a little bit when you mentioned earlier how some families or some people may be hesitant to reach out based on, mixed status, or maybe just not wanting to accept that someone has a disability or someone's, life is going to be different than what they anticipated, than what neurotypically we expect. These barriers oftentimes can be the hardest ones to deconstruct and get over, these more mental blocks. But once that happens, people are free to take control over their lives and make use of resources and supports that are available to them. Now, in a case study of liberation among Latino immigrant families who have children with disabilities, researchers used a four-stage framework to model how communities can take charge of their situations and empower themselves to advocate for change on behalf of family members with disability. And I found that it's very widely applicable to a lot of the work that the ARC does and a lot of advocacy work in general. So, the first part of this framework begins by gaining critical awareness of one's situation and coming to terms with a disability diagnosis, understanding the barriers one may have to face in a society that may not always take them into account. Just having that awareness of disability and what it means for them and for their situation. The second stage is learning to emphasize individual and group strengths rather than deficits and limitations, which I think the ARC does very well. It can help individuals get out of that mental rut of self defeat, of how could this have happened to us, why us, and get them moving, get them connected with others that can help them see their potential to not only help, their child or their loved one, but to take that knowledge and affect change on a larger level. The third stage is gaining the skills, knowledge, and experiences to aid individual growth and to foster collective action when it comes to disability activism, whether on the local or the national scale. And that's kind of what some of these ARC programs I feel are designed to do, getting people the skills, knowledge in order to take that information and apply it practically in their situation and maybe for others as well. And the final stage is taking action in collaboration with others, making use of our communities and those we love to help us with our struggles in order to, create a bigger splash. Practicing these four steps can help lead people and communities towards liberation from ableist social narratives that might say this is the way the world is, and you just have to deal with it. There are many different programs and resources, like I mentioned, that the ARC has access to that help Latinos and their communities engage in this kind of activism. Now, Rocio, talking about these programs and resources, how do these things that the ARC provides help people gain awareness and acceptance when either first receiving a disability diagnosis or just coming to acceptance with living a life that involves disability?
Okay. Well, when we get that call, um, we start with where they're at. It depends on what they tell us. Like one might be, I just got this diagnosis, I don't know what to do. Or I was told this is where I need to call. And so we would probably, we would engage them in a conversation to see what their needs are at the time and what kind of information. When someone calls us and say, I now know that my child is on the autism spectrum, what should I do? Um, because we've received that so many times, that in terms of inquiry, we've already developed a fact sheet called "What Do I Do After an Autism Diagnosis?" And we have that available in English and Spanish. Also, we provide information about what other resources can they search for, using their health insurance, using their schools. What are some of the state funded programs? What is in their community? And letting them know that there are opportunities, letting them know that their child can develop more skills, that there's always the potential, and every child is different. So I think being hopeful is very important, and giving them information, especially when there are support groups out there. There may not be many, but there are support groups that are available in Spanish. And I could say Grupo Salto, which is in Metro Chicago, as well as Easter Seals in Joliet. They have support groups for the Spanish speaking Latino population. So we do our best to know about the resources available. But again, we do encourage families to look at what's in their community, to ask that social worker. Maybe there might be another family that they see often when they're there to pick up that child, and reach out to them as well. So again, we do a lot of listening and asking some questions, and then we provide the information, and always saying, feel free to call us back. Sometimes we get it via email. So we respond via our helpline, we respond via our website. And so we would do the same thing in our message to them. Always feel free to give us a message or a call back, with if there's any other questions or if you have any other needs.
Right. So I gave a little fist bump when you mentioned Easter Seals because I'm currently working at Easter Seals Metropolitan Chicago Academy in downtown Chicago. And I know firsthand how great of an organization they can be. My brother attended an Easter Seals affiliate for a lot of his OT needs growing up. And if you have, a local Easter Seals affiliate or an organization that you can go to, again, I highly recommend it. They have great people with great training and very knowledgeable when it comes to autism and other intellectual and developmental disabilities. But you also mentioned that you have what to do with an autism, or what do I do with an autism diagnosis, like worksheet or fact sheet. And I can say confidently that would have been a great help when my parents were first getting my brother's diagnosis, especially the Spanish language one, because when my grandparents first heard that their grandson was going to have a disability, they didn't know what autism meant. They didn't know what that would mean for their child or for their grandchild, and how it would affect their daughter and son-in-law raising that child. But to have that information to assuage different fears and to clear up different misconceptions is huge, especially like right at the beginning when everything is just kind of coming at you at once. Like, you get the diagnosis, and then we got to worry about early intervention, we got to worry about school, we got to worry about different special recreation programs, just getting all of that together. So to have this sort of what's the next step worksheet all in one place is kind of like a light in the dark, like a torch in a cave. It is just very, very useful for so many.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of things you're like that you feel like you got to get done all at once. And, we just let parents know one step at a time. Just, check off one thing, and then, see what's the next priority. A lot of parents now are, they like, I got to get into ABA. Well, there is wait lists, whether, and then it doesn't matter the type of insurance that you have. So it's important to just kind of assure the parents, yes, there is a time that you might have to wait for this particular type of therapy, but there are other things that you can do as well. So providing that assurance helps.
Absolutely. Yeah. My next question, regarding the second step of that four-step empowerment framework. How do the ARCS programs emphasize individual and group strengths within the disabled Latino community when it comes to the clientele you work with?
Well, number one, we always use people first language. So we always say the person with the disability. We just
Mm.
don't say disability, autistic person, but a person with autism or a person with cerebral palsy, a person who uses a wheelchair. Second of all, I want to make this point is that sometimes we know that our family members with disabilities have lots of strengths, and to encourage them that they can use those skills at home, at school, in the community. However, we too also need to let the families know that if they are applying for services, unfortunately, you got to talk about the deficits. You got to talk about what they cannot do. So, like, right now, we encourage families to get on puns because that is the gateway to funding. But we also have to let them know, hey, if your child has behavior such as elopement, such as conduct, you got to let them know. So there are times when, yes, we talk about the strengths because there's always going to have strengths. There's always going to be room to grow. But to get funding, you got to talk about the limitations and the deficits. So it's kind of a double edged sword. But I think just having a conversation about it, people become more comfortable and will understand that, at different stages of the life, you're going to see both. You're going to see the weakness and you're going to see the strength, and then you're going to kind of maneuver so that you can know when to use that particular language, if you need it for funding purposes, and so forth.
Right, and that actually reminds me of this idea in disability studies, where as we emphasize the strengths and the can-do attitude of those with disabilities, we can sometimes forget that they still live with a disability and do need assistance in some areas. Like just because they are independent in some ways or in certain areas of their life, they still may need assistance in other areas. So by portraying people as overcoming all of these obstacles or as being, so inspirational because they're living a life with a disability and still doing great. It is kind of covering up the fact that there are still things that are very difficult for them to
Yeah.
deal with, whether it's in the social environment or the physical structures of how we build our society. There are different, limitations that present themselves. And we do our best to kind of minimize these narratives of deficit and limitation when it comes to the worth of someone with disability. Like just because they have a disability doesn't mean that they themselves are, deficient in some way. It just means that some of their ability or some of their capacity at any given time might just need a little bit of a boost, a little bit of, backing in order to do something either as effectively as a non-disabled person would do it or just enough to get by almost.
Yes, that there's always going to be a need for support, and even like you said, the neurotypical. Like, I know there's many people who need support with budgeting.
Oh
Who
yeah,
doesn't?
absolutely. Okay. So moving forward, combining the pieces of critical awareness and emphasizing group strengths, how does the arc then use those parts or those aspects to help people gain the skills and knowledge they need in order to be better advocates, for either themselves or for those in their life with disabilities?
I think that through the webinars, families get that information that they can use to advocate for their family member as well as for the rest of their community. Especially particularly now in the political environment, as we're seeing the programs that were considered a safety net, particularly Medicaid. There is difficulty in maintaining it as it is currently. And so providing that information via a webinar or an ARC email blast is letting families know what way, how they can advocate. Some families may want to make that phone call. Some families would prefer the electronic method of just using their phone. Some families may want to visit their legislator, but making them aware that there's different opportunities to advocate, as well as advocating in school when idea. ADA, you can better advocate for your child when you're in the school system. And then, there are parents who advocate when their child is out in the workforce. They could reach out to Great Lakes ADA, or they can read up on the ADA law, or maybe even call the Illinois Department of Labor. So there's different opportunities for families to advocate. But I guess the first step is the information, to letting them know about the different options that they have, because some individuals, like I said, and generationally, some individuals may prefer, phone calls, and some people may prefer letter writing. So, trying to provide the variety of options so that they can choose and they can become a voice for their family member in the way that they prefer.
Right. And then just kind of speaking about these webinars that you keep bringing up, not only are they accessible ways of getting information out, not only are they affordable, but they're also, I think, the most effective way of letting those in the Latino community know that they're not alone. Because for most Zoom webinars,
Mhm.
everyone's else little picture pops up. Even if they don't have the camera on, I think it's just kind of nice to know that, hey, I'm not the only person who is experiencing this thing or experiencing the stress involving getting my child signed up for this or not knowing information regarding this, helping to create that larger community bonded by the experience of having a family member, child, sibling, cousin with a disability and uniting over the shared aspects of what that looks like on a day-to-day life.
And the webinar also opportunities for chat, so the text chatting, but also, you can allow the audience to do, during a question and answer session, usually like the last 15 minutes. But when we have a smaller group, we will open up, we'll let everybody talk. And so that's depending on the topic. You have a lot of participation. And like you said, to hear other individuals talk about what they're going through, of what they learned, really builds up that community experience. One of the things that we were able to do 2 years ago is we at the ARC participated in a research study called Assisted. And so it was a 12-week session program. The families had a commitment to these 12 weeks. And so they really grew as a group and wanted to keep in touch with each other and got permission to share their emails with one another. So that's been another wonderful opportunity for families when they can be with other families, because webinars are one-time thing, but we do post them on our website and we have an archive so they can go back to them if they want to review them. And we also do the handouts, so that is available to them. But like I mentioned before, going back, I know I'm switching a little bit, the Assisted group was very unique, and that it was an ongoing series, and that families were sharing their emails and were talking to each other afterwards, and so got that sense of community. And so bringing them together was really nice, and that was through the work of Dr. Megan Burke at Vanderbilt University.
Well, that's a lot of very awesome information and a lot of great resources available for people. And just coming around to this last part of the four-step framework of taking action in collaboration with others, you kind of mentioned how during these webinars you encourage people to talk with each other, share information. In what other ways do you encourage people to collaborate with others in their community or to take what they've learned in these webinars and take it out into the world?
Well, we encourage them to reach out to the speakers. So, before we end the presentation, we want them to know, like, hey, this is presenter A, here's her email. She's available to take your questions. So, like, for example, we at times have someone from Social Security do a webinar. And so they get to know that person, they can reach out to that person, or they can call the 1-800 number, and they know how to better ask for someone to speak in their language. So I think that really helps. Just knowing that there are topics of interest, because sometimes families will, out of their chat, we get ideas for the next for the next webinar. So that is also being responsive to the community as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Rocio. Now, if you had to give a one paragraph summary, or just like, a quick snapshot of what the Arc of Illinois does for families and why they should make use of your services, especially in regards to Latino families, what do you think you would have to say?
Well, the Arc of Illinois advocates for people with IDD, families, and community organizations so that people with disabilities can live, work, learn, and play in the communities across the state. We provide resources and information. We give them opportunities for individual advocacy, and our services we personalize to those individuals. So, again, whether it's through a phone call, whether it's through an email, we want to best serve that person, their family, and with the expectation that they will get to the service that they need.
That was very beautiful. Thank you for that summary. And now, probably the most important question of this interview: how can the people at home get in contact with the Arc of Illinois?
Great. Well, thank you so much. Well, our webpage is www.thearcofil.org. They can call the Illinois Lifespan Program, 1-800-588-7002. By calling the Illinois Lifespan Program, we'll take that information, and then either we can give them the answer their questions, or we may forward them to another program that is available through the Arc of Illinois, or we may refer to an outside organization. I also want to let you know that our services are funded through the Department of Human Services, the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So our services are free of charge. So families will not be charged if they call us. Now, we do offer, on occasion, we offer workshops and conferences. Those do have a cost. However, through the Illinois Council on Developmental Disabilities, we're able to offer a consumer stipend to families who have a family member with a developmental disability so that they can attend.
All right. Thank you very much for everything that you have said here today and for your time. I'm sure that so many people, after seeing this episode, will gain something new or just have a better idea of what sort of resources are there to help them and what sort of people, especially, are in their corner. Because when it comes to families with members with disabilities, it does take a village. It takes so many different people working so hard to come up with what we have today. Now, if you want to
Thank you
contact,
so much.
if you want to contact the Arc of Illinois, the phone number, email address, and all other communication will be in the description. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Someone You Know. By listening here today, you've taken a step toward learning more about disabilities and those who have them. If there's anything you heard here today that you liked, leave a comment and share this episode with a friend. And remember, even if your life isn't personally touched by disability, chances are someone you know loves someone with a disability. And now you're more well informed on the topic. We'll see you guys next time.